Hello, everyone, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Lila Mills, Communications Manager with Neighborhood Connections. It's December 2nd, and you're with a virtual City Club Forum. Local news outlets are a vital component of a healthy community. They promote civic engagement, hold elected officials accountable, boost local economies, and foster community. Unfortunately, many states are grappling with a dramatic loss of local newspapers and news outlets. For example, today, Ohio has 32% fewer newspapers than it did in 2004. Fortunately, new publications and partnerships are aiming to fill the void with much needed coverage. A few of those publications include A Greater Buckeye, the Buckeye Flame, and the Cleveland Observer, as well as a new partnership effort titled the Northeast Ohio Solutions Journalism Collaborative, also called NeoSojo, which brings together more than 20 newsrooms across Cleveland and Akron to address community issues through a solutions journalism lens. Today, we have representatives from these outlets with us to share their unique models, their funding sources, and their contributions to the region's changing media landscape. Joining us today are Sharon Broussard, Project Coordinator for NeoSojo, Ron Calhoun, publisher of the Cleveland Observer. Founded about 18 months ago, the Cleveland Observer covers Asiatown, St. Clair Superior, and Huff, and has recently expanded to include Glenville, East Cleveland, Central, Fairfax, Mount Pleasant, and the Lee Harvard neighborhoods. We have Julian Kahn, who is a founder of A Greater Buckeye. It was founded earlier this year, and Greater Buckeye is an online news platform serving the news and information needs in Buckeye, Shaker Square, Larchmere, and Woodland Hills. And finally, we have with us Ken Schneck, who is the editor of the Buckeye Flame. Founded in June 2020, the Buckeye Flame stands as Ohio's only statewide LGBTQ+ news and views platform. Based in Cleveland, but covering every corner of the state, the Flame amplifies the voices of LGBTQ+ Ohioans to support community and civic empowerment through the creation of engaging content. As with every City Club forum, you can participate with your questions. Text them to 330-541-5794. Again, that's 330-541-5794. You can also tweet them at the City Club, and we'll try to work them in. With that, let's begin. Thanks, everybody, for being here today.
Well, thank you for having us.
So Cleveland has so many assets when it comes to local news, including folks who aren't with us today. So I just want to, before we start, I want to give a shout out to all the folks like from the East Side Daily News to the Plain Press on the West Side who have been out there kind of fighting this good fight for decades. Today, for all of us, you all are new and emerging, and we want to kind of focus on three main topics today: how you got started, how you're funded, and lastly, the best part, your stories, the stories that you've loved the most, the stories that your audiences have loved the most. So let's start by talking about a little bit about each of who you are. Particularly for Ron, Ken, and Julian, you all kind of strike me as you have other day jobs. Journalism is not your day job. And you all kind of strike me as the kind of people that if I needed to know something in my community, I'd come to you. Like, you're just natural connectors. You connect with people, you connect people together. In fact, earlier this summer, when I had a question about getting a sidewalk fixed in Buckeye, I went to Julian, and Julian knew the answer. So let's talk a little bit about some of your backstory, how you even came to start these media organizations. Ken, we talked a little bit about the Buckeye Flame, but you also do everything from stand-up to authoring books. And your day job is as a tenured professor. So kind of tell us the origin story of the Buckeye Flame.
Sure. Yes, I am indeed a professor of education at Baldwin Wallace University, largely speaking about leadership in higher education and racial justice in society. I've been a freelancer in Cleveland for about 5 years now. I moved to Cleveland in 2013, and I was writing for Cleveland Magazine and for Freshwater Cleveland, and also for Prism Magazine. So Prism magazine was launched in 2017, and you could find it all over the state. And in 2019, in March of 2019, they asked, they were having some leadership turnover, and they asked if I could just fill in as the editor for a couple months. I said, sure, I can do that for a little bit. And I ended up being the editor for a year until Prism shut down this past March because all the advertisers pulled out because there was no Pride to advertise for. There were no events to advertise for. So Prism shut down, and it just clicked immediately of, well, we can't not have any LGBTQ journalism presence in the state. So got together with a group of folks here in Cleveland and immediately decided, which we'll talk about in a bit, that we wanted to go the nonprofit route, that we wanted there to be a site that in particular amplified the voices of LGBTQ people of color, because we knew that those are the voices that are just not being amplified, and built a board. We built just the most ridiculously impacted, diverse board from all over the state. And I think within about 6 weeks, the site launched, and here we are entering month 6. It has been an incredible ride so far.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Ron, you have somewhat of a similar story to Ken. I mean, you were retired. You were entering retirement. You didn't intend to start a newspaper, and yet here you are, not only starting one, but growing one.
I tell people this all the time. If you would have told me 2 years ago that I was going to be publishing a newspaper, I would have told you were crazy. I am retired. I'm a retired system analyst from the Cleveland Clinic. And 2 years ago, I went to a community meeting and I expressed some concerns over not getting communications between the city of Cleveland, between the development that was going on in the city, in particular in the Huff Ward. And the smart guy kicked it back to me and said, well, what you going to do about that, Mr. Calhoun? And I'm sitting there kind of reeling going, oh, he kind of kicked it right back in my court here. So by the end of the meeting, I came back and I said, okay, I'm gonna reach out and maybe start a website, maybe start a print version, and let me get back to you. And 30 days later, I'm a doer. I mean, when you work for the clinic, you got to get your job done. So for 30 days, I just saturated myself in journalism. And believe me, if it wasn't for key partners like John Kopic over at the Collinwood Observer and Rich Weiss over at Tree Monster, kind of mentoring me along the path, it would have been a tremendous learning curve, but they helped. And so in that 30 days, I entrenched myself into how can I get this publication out? 30 days later, I walked into this councilman's office and I said, here it is. And he was pretty impressed because he turned a couple of pages, and I kind of got the impression that it was kind of be on the back burner. But as he turned the pages, he said, "Okay, I'm going to support this." So that's where the initial support came from, and it kind of blossomed from there. We've been consistently putting out a print version for 2 years now, and just recently in June we blossomed and expanded into the Cleveland Observer because at that time it was the Ward 7 Observer. So did I get drawn into this by chance? I look at it now and I go, nope, this was my destiny. And I'm enjoying every minute of it, meeting all these fantastic people.
I love it. I love it. Let's talk a little bit with you, Julian. Last year around this time, maybe, or a little bit earlier than this time last year, we were talking about your idea for Greater Buckeye. We were talking about the idea that it matters who tells the story. And then by June, you were putting out content that for me was must-see content. The stuff you did after the rally for Black Lives downtown,
yes,
the live IGTV talkbacks, that was stuff that I had to see. So can you talk a little bit about your drive to start a Greater Buckeye, why it's a social media platform particularly?
Yeah, well, social media is what I'm fluent with. Much like our other panelists, I've got a different a story, not traditional from your average journalist or what you may assume would be attached to them. But I've started something like this before. I started a blog, and it just didn't work well because capitalism came knocking, and I went the other way. And so now it's an opportunity for us to just kind of get it right. And what I recognized in the interim, while just kind of struggling with the decision to go towards capitalism and not really honoring what I felt like was just me being an intrinsic connector. That's what I felt like I was trying to create a destination space around that, and really honoring the fact or creating a transparent space where people were able to see that they were the ones, they were the real the resources, and that sort of thing that doesn't shine through if it's just me withholding the information and extending to everyone. So virtual space just gaining, just increasing value over the year. That was an important decision for us. Last year, I was afforded the opportunity to do some surveying in the neighborhood concerning the new community development corporation that was coming into Buckeye, Larchmere, Shaker Square, Woodland Hills areas and servicing there. So, it's really been a culmination of a lot of different things. That surveying that allowed me to do some deep listening in the neighborhood, and allowed me to understand that there are parallels throughout the neighborhood, regardless of the invisible boundaries that existed. We know that Ludlow may function distinctly different than Woodland Hills, but people still wanted transparency from from the people that were there to service them, just very simple things. But beyond that, it felt like just historically that there's always been a bit of a disconnect with us and traditional media sources. And when I say us, I mean the neighborhoods like Buckeye, which I call home, right? I can think over the span of years where just the number of times where I felt like I was underserved, or my story just didn't matter that much, or the response or the community response just didn't get the same sort of trumpeting that the these above the fold horror stories always got. What about the community response? There were many times where the neighbors and neighborhood just banded together and decided to respond to tragedies, but those things never got any coverage. And the only thing that reverberated and really controlled this neighborhood was this idea that this neighborhood was unsafe, and that it was it just helps to reinforce all of these the redlining and the issues that we talk about, right? Who wants to come in? Who wants to live in a space that seems like that? Who wants to service a space like that? As a business owner, who wants to exist in a space like that? 3-4 months ago, I had a conversation with a pizza shop owner who wanted to discontinue delivery services in Buckeye, and the only thing that he cited was news stories. So when we think about we're all Americans, but we know that there are two Americas, and the work that needs to be done is there needs to be restorative work. Yeah. And like I said earlier, with the surveying and stuff that we were doing last year, when I was in Buckeye, Woodland Hills, a lot of those neighbors didn't even know what a community development corporation did or who the previous one was. Yeah. And so it just reminded me that there was a lot of work that needed to be done, and that print media has its boundaries, and trusted news has to come from trusted sources.
Yes, it matters who tells the story. I mean, one of the things I loved last year when you were first telling me about the idea for a Greater Buckeye is you rewrote something that had been published in the newspaper from the perspective of residents. And it was immediately so much deeper and so much more engaging. It really matters, that perspective, who tells that story. Let's move on to Sharon here and talk about collaboration, because Neighborhood Connections, the Cleveland Observer, the Buckeye Flame, we're all members of Neo-Sojo, the collaborative. So can you talk a little bit about why collaboration matters and why all the good work that's happening can be stronger when we collaborate?
Yeah. Well, I think collaboration matters because it means, teamwork, and people that may have fewer resources around this time, especially with COVID, can now band together and can produce stories that they might not have been able to produce on their own. Our collaborative has been sharing reporters. I've had offers for people to use photographs from different websites. They've been working with radio and putting print stories or digital stories also on radio. So it just kind of expands the universe of what people can do, even though you may have a small shop. And so I think it's kind of the wave of the future. There are many collaboratives seated across the country these days, and we're trying to figure out how it works. So, I'm not saying that it's set in stone, but that's the idea of it.
Yeah, it's learning and experimenting. This week, Mike McIntyre from Idea Stream wrote something about the Neo Sojo Collaborative, and he said, that journalism and news and information are needed. They're essential to a healthy society. And even if we're doing it, we always need to be doing more of it, and that the collaboration helps us do more of that.
Lila, if I could comment on that,
Go ahead.
The motto from the 50s was you got to get that news out before the other people get the news out. And social media has changed that model. Collaboration is the new model. We have done some really unique things through the Sojo collab. I think it's the wave of the future. It is the future. And as long as we can collab together, we get that trusted input for the community, and then they start trusting us again.
Yeah. You did a great 4-part series through the collaborative. It reminds me of that idea that Julian was talking about, that it matters who's telling the story. And so, Ron, you may be able to tell a story in your community that is trusted, that I may not be able to tell, or Sharon may not be able to tell. Same with any of our various communities. So when we all come together, the narrative just gets that much richer. I want to back up a little bit, though, and talk a little bit about structure, because all of you kind of represent have a different infrastructure behind you. Ken decided to go the route of a nonprofit when he started the Buckeye Flame earlier this year. Ron, you work as an LLC, and Julian and Sharon, your projects are grant funded. So let's talk a little bit. Ken, can we go back to you and start with you? Talk a little bit about why you made that decision to go nonprofit.
Sure. Yeah, we from the very start wanted to go the 501c3 route. We didn't anticipate it was going to happen as quickly as it did, so we're quite pleased with that. We submitted the paperwork, and we were prepared to be told how we messed it up. But it was great. It sailed through, and everything. We are officially a 501c3. When you get that letter from the IRS and you don't know what's in it, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. But but for us, it was all about stake. It was all about the community having a stake in what it is that we do. Having previously worked for other publications where the publisher really had some editorial decisions and limited us. I'm thinking of an instance working for an LGBTQ publication where there was a Martin Luther King protest. There was a protest at a Martin Luther King breakfast a few years ago where some queer protesters of color were physically dragged out by the police. And I wrote a piece about that, amplifying their story. They were individuals raising bail for them. And I got a lot of pushback from the publisher being told, you really didn't represent the side of the police. No, I did not. This is an LGBTQ publication. And so we just didn't, from the very start, we wanted to avoid that. We wanted the LGBTQ community and the ally community to be the backers of the Buckeye Flame. We wanted to be accountable to them. We wanted to make sure that there was a space for everybody. And the 501c3 does make sure that we are, to some degree, nonpartisan. I think we struggle with that a little bit, and we got to get a little bit better at that. But from the very start, that is the route we wanted to go. We wanted the integrity of the 501c3, but we wanted the community to be our publisher.
Oh, that's beautiful. Sharon and Julian, you have grant funding. What do you think the role is of philanthropy in supporting journalism today?
To me, it's like, it's giving basically people the gas to do the things that they already do. They have a good card. They know their neighborhoods, they're connected. They talk to everybody. A lot of these publications are just very knowledgeable and very creative, but they don't have the gas in the tank in order to take those stories to as many places as they can, or wider distribution for a lot of those stories. So I kind of see that as their major role. I don't know what Julian thinks, so I want to hear.
I want to hear too. I was to be honest with you, it affords us the opportunity to throw some spaghetti off the wall, to be honest with you. You know, as an organizer and just doing other things in the neighborhood, it was always difficult for me to get people to fund something that they didn't know they needed, you know? And so this gives us an opportunity to figure out what people need, you know? So, you know, there are a lot of publications that are in the neighborhood. I mean, you mentioned one earlier, like Eastside Daily News. You know, there's a lot of resources in our neighborhoods. But you know, still those voids still existed, you know, as I noted earlier. And, you know, it really begs for us to get creative. And what I recognized here was an opportunity for us to do exactly that, to try and take the good information, news, whatever that may be. That's up to the community to decide what that is. It's not up to me. But for us to take that good news and take it into spaces where it's notably absent, or to reconfigure it in a space in a way that is more easily digestible. That's what that sort of funding allows us to do. It also allows us to conceptualize how to create a self-sustainable model in the future, so that we don't have to invite other agencies or anyone else who could ultimately control our narrative. You know, it just gives us a space to just grow and just dream without boundaries.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Sustainable future, controlling the narrative. Let's end with you, Ron, when we talk about this, because you have kind of the most traditional structure. You have an LLC. How is that working for you? How has it worked for you since the launch, and what have you learned along the way?
Well, yeah, we started with the traditional model of advertisements, and I'm starting to lean. I think Ken and Julian, they get it. I'm starting to lean towards the nonprofit. In fact, the Cleveland Observer is a nonprofit, as not like the Ward 7 Observer, which wasn't. And the reason I'm saying that is because, you know, again, we have this issue in the community that news source can't be trusted, and I understand that now, coming from a totally different background and into this arena. You start to wonder why things aren't told, why the truth isn't put out there. And so I had an example. I had a business. They wanted an advertisement, and then that business did something inappropriate. So now, do I write about that in spite of the fact that I'm getting paid by that business? Or it could be an institution, it could be the government. You put the example in that you would like to put in. Now, and then take that on a national or an international level. All of these traditional news sources are using advertisement as the model, but can they really tell the truth? So now I'm looking at the nonprofit, the 501c. If I can get nonprofit funding, now I can actually tell the truth and tell the story the way it's supposed to be told, as opposed to I got to watch this. I can't be biased. I can't be. So I like the new model of nonprofit, and I'm looking into it even more. And I think the old model, traditional model of advertisement, has its barriers. So I like the direction of nonprofit.
I love how you just keep learning and changing, Ron, and and being so flexible that you're starting all these different ways, and you didn't even intend to do this 2 years ago. Let's move into stories. You're all producing great work. The Buckeye Flame has, I think, 24 content areas. You're covering everything from arts to policy and legislation, faith, family. The Buckeye Flame has a section called Steal Our Stories, with guidelines for how others can republish your stories for free, giving credit to the Buckeye Flame. The Cleveland Observer has a community news section with editorials, rent assistance information, and more. You have a section where anyone can upload a story to be considered for publication. Julie and I was scrolling through the Greater Buckeye feed on Instagram. You've got stories about a new business. You've got stories about people staying safe during the pandemic. Tell me, what are your favorite stories that you all have produced this year, or the ones most loved by readers?
Yeah, so
we can start with you.
With me? Yeah, so
yeah,
great. We really try to balance out the news and views, right? So on the one hand, and we have to remember, Cuyahoga County, though we have protections here for employment and housing and public accommodations, most of the rest of the state does not. If an individual steps foot over the county line into Lake County, into Medina, they don't have protections. They can be fired for being LGBTQ. They can be kicked out of their housing for being LGBTQ. They can be kicked out of a restaurant for being LGBTQ. And this is the Ohio Fairness Act, HB 369, has been bandied about in the state house for well over a decade. And so we want to make sure that we're covering the news, and there are bills that are active. It's not just HB 369 to protect the LGBTQ community, but it's also bills that are specifically targeting, in particular, our trans siblings. Bills that would deny youth the medical and psychological care that they are seeking. Bills that would prevent trans people from participating in athletics. So that's on the news side. On the views side, we really wanted to create a space where individuals could express their views, could express their commentary without barriers that they might find elsewhere to being published. One of our most popular stories was one of our writers, a local writer, BJ Colangelo, who wrote about her experiences with her wife going grocery shopping and the looks and the judgment, the explicit judgment that they get just trying to go grocery shopping. I myself, I swear not all of our stories have to do with grocery shopping, but I wrote a piece that maybe that's going to be the new theme, is the 25th content of being gay and grocery shopping. I was leaving the Trader Joe's a few months ago in Crocker Park and was in the parking lot and got a call from a 201 number, which is New Jersey, which is where I grew up, so I had to answer it. And it ended up being my bully from 25 years ago. 25 years later, this guy randomly calls me on my phone. It set me on this path, thinking about bullying, thinking about progress. How do we interact with people decades later? And so just dashed off a quick piece, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere. So people are eating up both sides. They want that authenticity. They want those views. They want to hear from other LGBTQ people and the experiences, not just in the 3 Cs, but there actually are gay people outside of Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus. And they want their views to be heard as well. But then also we have to cover the fact that we are specifically still being targeted by Republican Ohio senators and representatives with legislation to strip rights and to deny us the same rights as our neighbors. So there's a lot going on.
I love that piece, Ken, on the bully, because you also, at the end of it, have all the questions you're then wrestling with yourself. How have I used my platform? What should you do next? All these other questions. But I also love your answer you just gave now, because I do think it helps, help me recognize when you give that idea of just crossing the county line.
Oh, yeah.
Means it's an issue of personal safety. So I love that. Thank you for that.
I say that all the time. When I drove from Vermont to here in 2013, when I just drove 8 hours and moved from Vermont to Cleveland, I left so many legal rights behind. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah. It really shows the importance of the publication, just in being not only sharing personal stories, but also just keeping that at the forefront of the minds of folks who might not recognize that otherwise. Before we get to, in a few moments, we're going to turn to questions. If you have questions for any of our panelists, text them to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794. You can also tweet them at the City Club, and we will try to work them in. Before we turn to questions, we have a few that have already come in. I did want to talk a little bit, Sharon, about the utilities moratorium story. This published this week. I think it was the kind of story that wouldn't have been published without the collaborative. Can you talk a little bit about how that came together and the response?
Oh, yeah, that's taken a whole team of reporters to do, led by Connor Morris and Rachel DeSalle, but also TV and Idea Stream and some radio reporters. And basically they delved into what's going to happen to a lot of people after the utility forbearance ends. And they came up with this huge resource guide to help tell people, okay, if this is your utility company, this is where you should turn. And that was through the work of Shayna Black of Black Girl Media. So it was, once again, it was teamwork that made that such a great thing. What we heard already is that university hospitals, their social workers are going to be using our guide to help guide them on how to help people. And Sherrod Brown has tweeted out about how, the moratorium should not end so quickly, considering there's no package from Congress to help people. So it's gotten a lot of traction. We're trying to figure out where to go with it next. But it's like one of those stories that only by everybody piling on could we really make a difference and get this out to the community. And that's the kind of work that we like to do and see.
Yeah. One other quick piece here, just really want to highlight that idea that UH is using something produced through the collaborative that for the first time brings all these resources together. So that if I'm struggling with utilities, I have a one-stop shop I can go to figure this out. I think that's really important to just highlight that. But also I wanted to just super quickly talk about the collaboration with the Cuyahoga County Public Library, because Neo-Sojo launched its website this week. And that, again, would not have happened without that collaboration with the library. I think a really important partner.
Yeah, they've been a great partner. They built the website that we have now, and they are helping us post stories and all that kind of thing. And I should give a shout out then to the Cleveland Foundation. They have made it possible for us to have a Report for America reporter, Connor Morris, and he's done a lot of work for the collab, along with all the partners who've just been pretty fantastic at coming up with story ideas and kicking around story ideas that other people have and making them better.
Okay, great. We're going to turn to some questions. We have one question that has come in. The first question we have is, do any of you all participate or ask questions at the governor's COVID briefing? We can't see the journalists, but I wonder about diversity and inclusion of those asking the questions to ensure the concerns of all Ohioans are addressed.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe some of my members actually would be. Cleveland.com is with us in WKYC, so I'm sure that they're there, but I'm not there personally, no.
No, I have not been there either, so that's a great question.
It's a great question. It's a great question. Question number 2, Julian, you mentioned doing community surveys. Please discuss that process and the types of questions you asked.
Wow. Well, the surveys were basically asking folks what they wanted to see in their neighborhood, how they wanted to be serviced, and so the most important thing for anyone is looking to service in a neighborhood is to take up measurements first. You walk into a clothing store and you're looking to get something fitted for you. They're not just going to pull something off the rack and say, here, this should work. And so that wasn't the goal with those surveys either. We want to understand where the voids were, where people that historically felt underserved, where they saw themselves, and where they would like to go as a community, and just understanding where their boundaries were, so on and so forth. It was really about just restoring a neighborhood and just tapping into the needs of people. It was very simple. It really wasn't anything that's prescriptive. But my grandfather used to always say, if you want to learn anything about somebody, you play 18 holes of golf with them, and I learned that as a caddy as a kid. But I would utilize some of that know-how in the surveying as well. Just sitting down and just providing an open ear, you'd be surprised what you'd hear from people and how people would open up. And just having other experiences that normally wouldn't connect otherwise in your back pocket, to connect with people, to remind them that they are not alone in their suffering or frustration, that's on another level. I mean, that's restorative on another level. And that's what good storytelling can do. But yeah, the surveying was really just about gaining consensus and figuring out how to support the Community Development Corporation into moving into the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. You, Julian, Ron, and Ken have all talked about that idea of being led by the audience. So you're making sure that you're asking the questions that are going to lead you in the direction that people are interested in having you move. Okay, so we have another question here. As we are reimagining journalism, are we reimagining enough room for community members to tell their stories and report on their own communities?
Oh,
Yeah.
without it, without a doubt.
We're ready to jump all over that right now.
I'm sorry I jumped the gun on that, but that is honestly, for the Cleveland Observer, that is the biggest opportunity to get people from the community to write their own story. We love it, and that's why we have that link on the site so that they can write their own story, put it, and submit it. We edit it, we make them look good, we produce it, and it's a done deal.
Absolutely. I'd love to piggyback off of that. Now, I'm sure I'd probably echo a lot of Ron's sentiments because he was at the table when we were, conceptualizing a greater Buckeye. And in many ways, he was my barometer. Am I going the right direction or not? But at the root of this was always centered around people telling their own stories. Last year, I remember we were working with a grocer in the neighborhood, and I had just come out of a nail salon for personal and professional reasons. And, they were all kind of shouting and just upset about this grocer. And when I came outside, there was a news journalist outside who was doing his own story. He said, "Oh, we've got a breaking story." And he put the camera in my face and he said, "Would you be interested in doing a story with us?" And I've got these flyers about this, what I feel like is a trending story in our neighborhood. And but he said, "We just learned that banking institutions have had a history of unfair lending practices towards African Americans." And I was thinking, wow, this is breaking news from 1796, maybe. Or something. But it just reminded me that that there's space for some of these hyperlocal issues, and it's up to us to really tell those stories. So we've got all sorts of tools or whatnot to help people tell those stories. We'll be rolling out our website very soon. But we've got GoPros and all sorts of stuff that we've purchased in hopes to just extend to people, help train them in using those things. But just how can we help you to tell your story? How can we shine a light on a space that needs light shined on it?
Yeah. So there was a second part to that question. The second part is community writing too difficult to edit or publish, or is the quality of the community perspective more important than the quality of the journalism? That's kind of a loaded question.
I might not have jumped all over that question if I heard the second part of it.
Well, and let's Kim wants to say something. Go ahead, Kim.
Well, I was going to say, who's determining quality? I think that's a really exclusive club sometimes. And that's what prevents people from expressing their point of view. I mean, this is what we see over and over is that, well, don't step up to the mic unless you know exactly what. No, step up and speak from your authenticity and speak how these things are affecting you. And so, again, I think that I think it's a really fair question. It's an important one. And we certainly will get responses back and say, well, that word shouldn't have gone there. Cool. I read the piece. And that was the important piece. So I would really push back against what we're saying is quality and who it is that's determining that. Because largely who's determining that, if I can say, are straight white men.
Wow. I struggle with that also because when you're mixing between the professionals and hyper news, which is viewed totally different. The professionals think one way, and then the hyper news people think another way. You have to do a balancing act. You get a story that's not quite up to professional standards, and you say, okay, how do I present this so that it gives a good light in terms of journalism, but also tells the story? And then you get the professional journalists, and we've had an opportunity to work with the Rachel DeSales, Aussie Scrubs, and it seems like they think the more information and the more data is good, but when you're trying to discern that and give it to the community, it turns into a balancing act, and that we struggle with that. We struggle with that big time, but we try to make sure that it's fair, it's balanced, and it's truth.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Ron that can often be a struggle. that we've discussed in the past. But, when you have 20 different news outlets, you've got to be able to share it. So it has to be at some kind of level. So that way, as many publications as want to share it can do so. So I always find that to be important. So that way the news is distributed to a lot more outlets than just maybe the one where it started. So, but yeah, it's a discussion.
Lots of discussion, and in different formats too, right? Different people are going to be attracted to different ways. So we have a lot of questions coming in. So I'm going to keep on piling through these. This is an interesting one, Sharon, for you. For organizations wanting to support all of the Sojo publications, is there a way to advertise in them collectively as opposed to 15 separate media buys?
That has been discussed by Ron, probably more than me. Because we're grant supported, that hasn't really come up, but we're not going to be grant supported forever. So I'm going to say yes, at some point there will be a way to advertise, and we will gladly accept it. We do have a website, for example. That could be one way to do it, but it's probably going to take a group conversation to figure out what mode we're going to be doing that in if we do it.
And similar to what Julian talked about before, so the Sojo Collaborative is grant funded for 2 years, I think.
Yes.
And then at that point, the idea is you're going to have enough kind of road under your feet to be able to figure out some sustainability issues. And I think probably that piece would be key to that. Right. We have another question for the collaborative. Have you considered a compensation model for the writers whose stories are shared between partners? Can you talk a little bit about how folks are compensated?
Yeah, we do have a grant of about $65,000. It's much less now, but in any case, yes, we can pay freelance writers and freelance photographers and freelance graphics people. So yes, people can be compensated, and that's what Ron and Ken make sure happens after they've written for us.
And so those of us who are collaborative members, we're not compensated to be part of the collaborative, but for instance, the series that Ron ran in the Observer, those writers could have been compensated through.
They were compensated,
The writers were compensated, the photographers were compensated. If it went on radio, they were compensated. So everybody but the publisher is getting compensated around here.
Good point.
I think too, as time goes on, I years ago did a community newspaper in which we weren't able to compensate many people. And I do think compensation is a key issue, right? If we're valuing people's time, compensation goes along with that. Okay, so here's another question we have. How do the panelists see their role, if there is one, from moving from niche news to mainstream media, i.e. not just being seen as LGBTQ news or news for a certain community, but just as news? Or is the goal to remain hyper-local and not move into what is considered mainstream media? Again, another kind of loaded question.
Yeah, definitely.
I always say stay in your lane, there's less traffic.
Yes.
And so my mother used to always say that it's hard to serve people that you don't love. And we know that love is a byproduct, that trust is a byproduct of love. And so, when I started to think with those foundational principles, I shouldn't be servicing any place that I don't know people, love people, willing to serve people, regardless of what hours I've dedicated myself to, so on and so forth. That's what makes this place home for me. That's what makes some of these issues home for other folks, is what strikes us here in these places, And, what I said earlier about me starting something before, my intentions were in the right place. But my mantra after that was never to attach payment to my purpose. And so understanding who I was and what I intrinsically was, who I intrinsically am, and what I feel like I'm here to do, what I can't turn off, me being a connector, that's what we really have to build around. And, just hope that people are drawn to the light and that we're able to build more light. That's, for me, it's just staying where we're supposed to, staying in my lane. That's what I'm going to be doing. Not to worry about me.
The goal isn't so much larger or more mainstream, but I love that idea of shining more light. Can you talk about that too, Ron and Ken as well?
Well, let me just reverberate exactly what Julian is saying. We got to stay in our lane because, frankly, the east side of Cleveland has been a news desert forever, and there's plenty of news there already. But the other side of it is, do I want to expand into an area that's going to be more work. Not really, not at this time anyway. And I don't see it in the future, to be honest with you. It's niche news, and again, as Julian said, you report on where you love, who you love, and then you gain that trust, and that's the real end game of this, I guess you could say.
Yeah, when we first selected the name, the Buckeye Flame, I got a lot of pushback. In particular, from my people in my family who went to the University of Michigan, but mostly from people who didn't think it should just be called. They thought it should just be called the Flame. Don't call it the Buckeye Flame, because at some point you might be able to expand and go more national.
Mm.
It's never the goal. There is more than enough to cover. We're not trying to compete with the Advocate and Outmatch, who have resources that we can't even approach. We want it all to be through that lens, right? So in the podcasting world, we call it narrowcasting, where you're starting with this dedicated community that's invested, and then hopefully it does expand and we're hitting on some universal themes. We're still going to hit on national issues, right? We're still going to talk about the fact that I can't walk out of my house right now and go give blood because gay men are banned from giving blood for a year, right? That's a national issue. But we're always going to approach it from an Ohio LGBTQ perspective, as the only state in the country where trans people cannot change their gender for driving license. As one of, only not the majority of states where we don't have the protections I listed earlier. So we really, everything that Julian said, it resonated so much with me, and I'm so appreciative for those words of just, this is our community. This is what we're sticking with. We're certainly not going to run out of stories to tell as we stay with LGBT people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Someone's asking, what support do you need? What kind of support would you like?
Oh, wow. I bet you my group would say advertising, and they would probably, for their individual publications, and they would probably also say readers and people who are interested in solutions, which is what our little niche is. All my publications can, write whatever they want, as long, but what we're paying for really is for solution stories that point to ways that communities are trying to solve problems that may be longstanding, maybe novel, just sprung up during COVID, but actually have found some ways to solve them. And that's the kind of stories that we want to tell. But I would say, yeah, readers, advertising, interest, concern.
And we should say here that it's neosojo.com, right?
Yes.
And on there, we can see all the partners of the collaborative,
all
with
the partners
links to those partner sites.
Yeah, and all the solution stories that we've done, many of them that we've done so far as well. So,
yeah, I guess our barrier is, or opportunity is, bringing continuity to the three. The Cleveland Observer has the three platforms. It has the web platform, it has a social media platform, it also has the print platform, and we're even trying to go into the broadcasting platform. Yeah, more work, but the barrier becomes bringing continuity to that, and then connecting, still maintaining the connection with the community. And again, more input from the community would serve me great.
More input. Ken, Julian, anybody?
We'll take donations. We're happy with donations there. That's anything that keeps the work going. We are really dead set on compensating all of our writers. We do not ask for free content. And it's amazing that some people push back on that and say, no, I'm just happy to be published. No, stop saying that. You're compensated for your time. That's how this works. And so all of our financing goes towards writers. We don't have any other costs. It's funny, I said when I was working with Prism, I said, I as soon as Prism, if we were to move to an online only publication, I'm out, because I have no desire to be the editor of an online only publication. And then here I am, the editor of an online only publication, and I really enjoy it. And it keeps the costs are like zero, except that we have to compensate our writers. So all the money that gets donated is tax deductible and goes to our writers. It goes literally to creating new LGBTQ Ohio content.
Mm. I love this idea that, even though you're talking about the idea of loving your community and staying in your lane, all of you are growing in different ways. Julian going towards launching the website and with the equipment for the community. Ron just going to broadcast, going all over the city. Everyone is growing within their community that they love. And I think that's so important.
Yeah. You plant a seed, the seed has to break the shell, right? So, it's a process. There has to be a lot of support around that seed, to say the very least. But we also have to create the conditions for growth to ensure it continues to grow as well. And so when we think about like what we need, we need everything. I would imagine all of us would sign up like that, because in many instances we are that seed, right? We're being planted in these spaces, and we're being forced to kind of crack our shell and to grow in uncomfortable spaces that we're unfamiliar at, and just to be relying on our surroundings, which are unfamiliar to us. That's what growth is. That's what it looks like. And that's something we have to embrace. But if we're planted close enough to one another, we can share root systems. And that's what we're doing here. So, there's a lot that's happening here, but growth is hard.
And I just got a text from one of the writers that had not, one of the volunteer writers, who said, "Looks like you owe me some money."
I think we should talk to Ken, though. Ken was the one doing all that, not you.
Okay, we have another question that's just come in. Do the panelists see local policy change as part of their missions? And how do the reporting efforts translate to policy advocacy?
Yeah, I think that's really kind of critical, and the place probably many of us are trying to get to. I think that the writing helps people understand what the problem is. I mean, people can't go out and agitate until they understand, like, oh, this is how you're being treated, and this is why you're being treated that way, and this is maybe some of the ways that you can change that. So I think that's what our goal is to hit that. And that's one of the reasons why we thought the utility moratorium story was so important. People could see just how confusing. There's a lot of resources out there, but good luck in trying to figure out, how to actually utilize them. And maybe that will force some people in power to say, like, hey, there are ways that we could chop this apart and break this apart and make it easier for people to get the kind of services they need. And so, impact, I think probably everybody on this panel would say that that's like their North Star, right?
Oh, yeah, I would agree. The impact is big. And I think some of the things have already started to impact. The Sojo gave us funding for the minority women's pregnancy and COVID, and how it has affected after the pandemic has been with us for so long. And to be honest with you, I didn't realize how pregnant Black women were being treated. Not necessarily just pregnant Black women, but women going to the doctor. And that story opened up my mind, and I'm hoping that it opens up other people's mind to understand what people go through. And I think if you read the news lately on one of the channels, University's Hospital just got a big $1 million donation for pregnancy disparities, health disparities for minorities. Another funded project by Sojo that we did, and I'm trying to figure out if there's some correlation to that or relationship to that. I'm hoping so. And what it tells me is that we are all doing a service to the community, and it seems to be working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think particularly, the utility story, I imagine if I'm out there and I'm struggling with this, there's really not a place for me to recognize that this is a common story. And so the storytelling and the sharing uplifts it for policy change, but it also can help me individually recognize, this is an issue.
Right. Yeah. For so many people, where I think we just heard that the city of Cleveland has about 90,000 people who could, have trouble paying their bills. That's like the latest figure, and maybe it'll be updated. So it's a major issue.
So we have a question here about reprinting. We talked a little bit about this before when we talked about, the Buckeye Flame section, Steal Our Stories, but how is content shared between you all, if at all? How do you handle publishing others' content?
With that page, our Steal Our Stories page, I stole from another website. So it really is a bit
circular. Well, ours is deliberate. The way Neo Sojo works, wherever the collaboratives are, and there are 9 other collaboratives or 8 other collaboratives, the way it works at each one is that, we're paying for solution stories for our members to do that. And then the stipulation is that then those stories must be shared. And so therefore, I'm just so happy a lot of my partners see some stories and they're like, that'll work for my publication too. So that's the idea. And that broadens the reach of all those stories. So that way many more people can see them and read them and comment on them and engage with them. So,
and Lila, Sharon is a workhorse. She tracks all the stories. She tracks all the hits that they get on the websites. She gets the comments. She sees who is publishing on different websites. She holds us to the task. She actually does hold us accountable for it.
I'm trying, but they're a good bunch. They're a good bunch anyway. So not that much hard work.
And it's important to note, though, that there's always the credit, right? Yeah. So it's not just a free for all. We're just giving it away. There's kind of a structure to the chaos, right? And we want to make sure that you can always find out where the content came from, because that's part of it being trusted.
Right.
Yeah, we had an opportunity to actually produce a story from the Documenters program that you're familiar with, Lila. And at the bottom of the article, we put that story came out of the Cleveland. You guys are called the Cleveland Documenters, correct?
Yes.
So I mean, and that's common courtesy across the board for all the publications, is to wherever you got that story from, to give them credit for that story.
Yeah. I think that was our first time we had Documenters content republished.
Oh, another first.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming to time, so we're going to wrap up. I want to give everybody a last moment to say anything that we didn't touch on, anything that you really want to make sure people walk away from today keeping in mind.
Okay, I'll go. I'll say, like, one of the things I want people to keep in mind is that, we're focusing on solutions because we know that there are solutions to many of these problems, whether they're longstanding or not. I'm thinking of Ron's big 4-part series on doctors, Black doctors in particular, have been doing so much with AIDS and now have turned the expertise they learned from the whole AIDS crisis onto how to build trust in the Black community around COVID, which is critical as those vaccines come down the pipeline. So I guess I would say solutions. They're really important. They're really out there, and that's our job to highlight them.
I love it. They're really out there.
I
think sometimes we forget.
We do.
Solutions. It's
easy to forget. Yes.
I think one of the things that the collaborative really enables us to do is, and Sharon had mentioned about, and everyone has mentioned about broadening the reach, and that's been amazing. But for us, it's also just adding complexity to the stories. I think the collaborative really allows us to be truly intersectional with what we are shooting for. That you're not just an LGBTQ person who's experiencing this issue, but maybe you're an LGBTQ person navigating the moratorium and utilities, or you're living in East Cleveland, or you are a Black trans woman, so that we are allowing people to show up in their full selves when it is republished in all of these different fora, because people are seeing it across the board. So it's really allowing us to achieve the intersectionality that we're going for, and allowing people to be really their whole selves. That's our goal. So it's been great.
I guess the biggest message that I would send is we're a community. I mean, the journalism community here in Cleveland is pretty robust, and learning and working with all of these people who are professionals and even the local volunteers, we're all a family. and we're all have the same issues, and it's totally contrary to what's going on a national level. Well, maybe be changing on a national level, but I just enjoy being a part of this big family of journalism, and it's just fun. And if we can continue to build that family and prop each other up through collaborations, that would be fine with me.
Julian, any last words you want to take us home with?
You know, value of community. You know, if you want to go far, go together, right? And that's the goal here, is just to go as far as we can. How far can we take this idea? And Julian Kahn has his boundaries, but community doesn't, and energy never dies. So, you know, we can always pick this up, and maybe this isn't, maybe we won't realize it, you know, but I always like to think that, you know, if we plan to see the end of our work or whatnot, we're just not asking big enough questions. And so just got to keep asking those right questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you all for being part of the forum today. Conversation was so good, and you leave me with a lot to think about. Thank you for joining us for today's forum, featuring representatives from the newest publications and media partnerships in Northeast Ohio. We've been talking with Sharon Broussard, Project Coordinator for the Northeast Ohio Solutions Journalism Collaborative. We've been talking with Ron Calhoun, publisher of the Cleveland Observer. We've been talking with Julian Kahn, founder and curator of A Greater Buckeye, as well as Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame. This forum is part of the Reimagining Journalism series, sponsored by the Cleveland Foundation. We appreciate their support of City Club programming. This forum is also the annual WCLV Forum endowed by Robert and Jean Conrad, which recognizes the extraordinary relationship between a Cleveland radio station and the City Club of Cleveland, and celebrates their mutual respect for the fundamental importance of free speech. We appreciate Bob and Jean's ongoing support of the City Club. All City Club virtual forums are sponsored by Bank of America, the Cleveland Foundation, Eaton, the George Gunn Foundation, Key Bank, Nordson, the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and PNC, and the many more generous members, sponsors, and donors listed on their website at cityclub.org/thank you. You can join them in supporting this work when you make a contribution online or become a member at cityclub.org. I'm Lila Mills. Thanks for joining us today. Our forum is now adjourned.